based on your word alone. Let your spirit go forth and teach us and guide us, Lord, in your mighty name. Amen. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, John. The last two times that I spoke, I talked about Abraham and then I talked about Isaac. So this time I'd like to talk about Jacob. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are the foundational patriarchs of God's covenantal people, the Jewish nation. In the Old Testament, Exodus chapter 3, verse 6, God tells Moses, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And in the New Testament, Matthew 22:32, Jesus said to the religious leaders and to the people listening, I am the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. So why is naming these three people together so significant? Because they represent God's covenant promise to the Jewish people and God's faithfulness and unchanging nature across generations. And invoking their name carries deep theological and relational meaning. Now, before I talk about Jacob in particular, for perspective, let me just mention the time from Adam to Abraham and the time from Abraham to Jesus. If we look at the genealogy found in Genesis 5 and 11, we learn that first came Adam, and then Abraham was born 2,000 years after Adam. Now, as a side note, real quick, Abraham is a descendant of Noah's son Shem and was born about 350 years after the worldwide flood. Anyway, so from Adam to Abraham is about 2,000 years. And from the time to Abraham to Jesus is also about 2,000 years. And I note with interest that we are approaching 2,000 years from the time of Jesus to where we are now. I don't know what to make of that. I just make note of it. Maybe Jesus is coming soon. Anyway, getting back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. If you recall, Abraham was the person that God promised to make his descendants as numerous as the stars of heaven and the dust of the earth. And Abraham waited 25 years for God to take the first step in answering that prayer in the form of Isaac, his son. Isaac is the son of the promise, born not through man's effort like Ishmael, but through the miracle of God. Like his father, Abraham, Isaac had to wait many years before a descendant was born to him and his wife, Rebekah. Abraham waited 25 years for a son to be born to him. Isaac and Rebekah waited 20 years. Like his father, Abraham, Isaac's character was refined over the time he waited for God to fulfill his promise. While Rebekah was pregnant, God informed her that she was carrying twins and that the older Esau would serve the younger Jacob. And by this statement, God revealed that the promise given to Abraham would pass down through his grandson Jacob. Abraham, Isaac his son, Jacob his grandson. Esau's name means hairy or rough textured. Jacob's name can be translated as he deceives. Like I did with Abraham and Isaac, I'd like to take a look at some of the key events in Jacob's life. Much of Jacob's life is defined by the conflict he had with his twin brother Esau. The two of them wrestled with each other while still in their mother's womb. And the two boys grew up quite differently. Esau was an outdoorsman and a hunter. Jacob was content to stay at home among the tents. When they were older, Jacob used cunning and strategy to gain his brother's birthright as firstborn. Jacob waited until a day when his brother Esau came back famished from being out in the fields all day. And Jacob was making stew. And Esau requested some of the stew. And Jacob said, "First, sell me your birthright." Now, in Jewish tradition, the birthright was the right of the firstborn son to a double portion of the family's wealth, the right to become the head of the household, to rule over the family, and to represent the family in religious matters. Esau, who valued immediate gratification of physical needs over long-term interests, accepted Jacob's offer and sold his birthright for a bowl of soup. Jacob wanted the role of spiritual leader of the family and valued a special relationship with God as heir of the Abrahamic covenant, the promise that he would become the father of a great nation, inherit the promised land, and be in the lineage through which the Messiah would come. While Jacob made a trade for the birthright, he stole the blessing. The birthright represents the legal rights and material inheritance. The blessing from the Father was the formal spiritual declaration of heir to God's covenantal promises. Later in life, Jacob used deception to steal the blessing meant for Esau from his old and nearly blind father. Jacob bought the birthright. He stole the blessing. This act of stealing the blessing drew the hatred of Esau. And to escape Esau's wrath, Jacob's parents sent him away to Paddan Aram in modern-day Syria to his extended family. And on his way there, Jacob had a dream of a ladder to heaven with God at the top and angels ascending and descending. And in this dream, God speaks to Jacob and makes the same promise to Jacob that he made to Abraham and Isaac. God tells Jacob, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. You and your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and all people on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. When Jacob reaches Paddan Aram, he falls in love with his cousin Rachel and agrees to work for 7 years for his uncle Laban in order to marry her. The wedding is consummated in the darkness of night, and in the morning, Jacob, the deceiver, realizes he has been deceived into marrying Rachel's older sister, Leah, who was the firstborn. Laban agrees to also give his daughter Rachel in marriage to Jacob if he promises to work for him another 7 years once they are married. During his years of service, Jacob had 12 sons between Rachel and Leah and their handmaids, Bilhah and Zilpah. These sons would become the 12 tribes of Israel. After fulfilling his 14-year obligation to Laban, Jacob continued to work for his uncle. And this time, Jacob's wages for his work would be the speckled and spotted sheep and goats from Laban's flocks that Jacob would tend. God was with Jacob, and Jacob's flocks grew and flourished while Laban had weak flocks. Laban and his sons grew resentful of Jacob. And God then told Jacob to go back to the land of your fathers and to your relatives. I will be with you. God told Jacob to go back to the promised land, the land that Jacob was on when he had the dream about the ladder to heaven. And God gave him the promise that his descendants would be as the dust of the earth. Jacob then took his family and all his possessions and secretly fled back to the land of Palestine. When Laban found out that Jacob had left the region, he pursued him and overtook him at Mount Gilead, which is in modern-day Jordan. And God warned Laban in a dream not to mistreat Jacob. The next day, Laban and Jacob meet and agreed to part company and not to invade each other's lands. Now, Jacob had to face his brother Esau, 20 years have passed since Esau threatened to kill Jacob for deceiving him and stealing his blessing and taking his birthright. Jacob sent messengers to Esau telling that he was coming back to the land. The messengers came back and told Jacob that Esau was coming to him with 400 armed men. Jacob was in great fear and distress that Esau would attack him and his family and his flocks. And Jacob came before God and prayed, calling on the God of his grandfather Abraham and the God of his father Isaac. And in his prayer, Jacob declares his unworthiness for all God's kindnesses and faithfulness. Jacob asks God to save him from attack by his brother Esau and reminds God of his promise to make his descendants like the sand of the sea. The next day, Jacob assembled a great gift for Esau, consisting of many goats, sheep, camels, cows, bulls, and donkeys. He sent them forward in groups, one at a time, to Esau with the message that they are a gift from Jacob. That night, Jacob sent his wives and children and all the rest of his possessions across the ford of the river, and now he was left all alone. Alone in the desert wilderness, Jacob had the ultimate restless night. A stranger visited him, and the two wrestled through the night until daybreak. At daybreak, Jacob's hip was crippled, yet still he held on to the stranger. Jacob must have known that there was something supernatural about the stranger, because Jacob demanded a blessing from him. The stranger then gave Jacob a new name. He would no longer be the deceiver. He would be Israel, which means he struggles with God. Jacob called that place the face of God, for he said, I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared. That day Jacob met his brother Esau, and it was not the attack he feared. They met in peace. Jacob then journeys to the land of Canaan and buys property to pitch his tents. And there his daughter Dinah is raped by a pagan man. Jacob's sons retaliate by killing every male in the village of the perpetrator. God speaks to Jacob and tells him to get up and move to Bethel, which is north of Jerusalem. At Bethel, God reaffirmed his promise to give the land to Jacob and his descendants, and that a community of nations would come from him, and kings would be among his descendants. A couple of years later, Jacob would experience heartbreak when his wife Rachel dies while giving birth to Benjamin, the last of Jacob's 12 sons. Scandal then rocks the family as Jacob's oldest son Reuben commits incest with his father's concubine Bilhah. Jacob moves the family back to Hebron, where his father Isaac is living. At the age of 180, Isaac dies. Jacob is 120 years old. Jacob and his brother Esau together bury their father. The rest of Jacob's life is really about the story of his son Joseph and how he's sold into slavery to Egypt by his brothers. But what the brothers meant for evil, God used for good. Joseph would eventually become the number 2 ruler in Egypt and would save his family from famine. Joseph brings Jacob and the rest of the family to be with him in Egypt. Jacob would live in Egypt for 17 years, dying at the age of 147. Joseph and his brothers take Jacob's body back to Canaan to be buried alongside Abraham and Isaac. Jacob's name, he deceives, does seem to characterize many significant aspects of Jacob's life. But God appeared to Jacob on multiple occasions, and Jacob believed the promises of God. On that night, returning to the land of Canaan, when Jacob wrestled with God all alone, faced with the possibility of losing all his possessions and his family, in his weakness and fear, he finally ceased his struggling and could do nothing but hold on to God and ask for his blessing. The similarities in the lives of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob are striking. We see the importance of family and the influence of example. Themes like deceit and favoritism, family strife, reconciliation, and faith flow through the stories of their lives. Mainly, we see that God is faithful to his promises. He chooses to accomplish his kingdom purposes through sinful people who are willing to believe him and follow him. In about a dozen places in the Bible, God refers to himself as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God's original promise to Abraham was reaffirmed to both Isaac and Jacob. That promise was to make his descendants as numerous as the dust of the earth and to bless all the people on earth through his descendants. That blessing would ultimately find its fulfillment in Jesus. In Jesus, we have both forgiveness of sins and reconciliation with God. In Jesus, we find our blessing and our true purpose in life. May we be men of valor who in the struggles of our life do three things. Number one, hold desperately onto God. Number two, cast all of our fears and anxieties on him. And number three, ask for his blessing in Jesus. For he is faithful. Amen.
Thank you, John.
Sure.
And we're in the radio